The 2025 Supercars Championship is finally upon us, kicking off this weekend with the Sydney SuperNight, and we have so much to catch up on, from some bombshell announcements during the off-season to lots to look forward to in the racing itself during the 10 months or so ahead of us. So let's jump into our first round preview of the new season. Our battleground this weekend is Sydney Motorsport Park, an event that's largely set to be held under lights. It's a great little road course, Supercars heartland I would call it, not too far out from the Sydney CBD. The track is 3.9 kilometers long, or 2.4 miles, with 11 turns in an anti-clockwise direction, and the risk rating is an interesting one around here. I'll put it at low because there's a lot of runoff at this track, but the shape of it, the corners and the way they flow into each other encourages a lot of side-by-side racing, and as a result, we're rarely short of action around here. The lap gets underway with a very fast left-handed sweeper, and after a short shoot of a straight, you're on the anchors for the big braking zone of turn 2. That's a left-handed hairpin that feeds you directly into turn 3, where you go down a hill and into the right-hander of turn 4. We often see switchback racing into turn 5, a 90-ish degree left-hander where track limits are always a talking point on the exit, and then you're off to the left once again. Your next corner, though, is a downhill sweeper, turn 7, that feeds you quickly into the double apex right-hander of turn 8, followed by another short straight, a kink off to the right, and then a multi-apex long left-handed corner that sets you up for the big fast front straight. If you're new to the channel, I always like to call out some spots to watch, different parts of each track that I think are worth paying particular attention to. Turn 1 around Sydney Motorsport Park is always exciting to watch. We see some high-speed poker here where cars pull off some incredible moves. Just look at Matt Payne last year pulling off a great double overtake, but equally we can see it turn to disaster at very high speed as well. It's definitely high speed poker at this part of the racetrack. Turn 3 also sees plenty of drama. The cars often run side by side through here, especially on lap 1, and interlocking wheels can feed you into the fence on the left-hand side. Even if you get through there cleanly, we often see some very aggressive driving here as they contest for position down into turn 4. Turn 7 is my final spot to watch because I feel like this is an area that really takes two to tango. The drivers really do have to work together to get through this sequence side by side, and that rarely happens because I feel like this part of the racetrack is where the drivers just get fed up and they end up feeding each other off the road. The previous sequence of corners encouraged some great side-by-side action, but by the time they get to turn 7, it almost feels like they want to put those battles to bed. And as a result, we can see lots of drama. And on the topic of drama, we're not going to have to wait very long for it. The teams and drivers are thrown right into the deep end on Friday with just 30 minutes of practice, followed by a quali session, and then the first race of 2025 happening on Friday night under lights. They are straight into it with a sprint race. Moving into Saturday, things get a bit more familiar if you're a storied Supercars fan. We've got qualifying in the mid-afternoon, followed by a top 10 shootout, and then a longer race fully under lights from 7:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Moving into Sunday, we've got the same structure, but with some slightly earlier times, qualifying, followed by a top 10 shootout, and then the final race of the weekend will happen in the late afternoon sun. Of course, this event is happening at a far better time of year. We've been crying out for a long time for Supercars to move this event out of the winter and more towards the summer months, and that's exactly what we've got. And as a result, at the time of recording, I hope I don't jinx it, it's looking like really pleasant conditions if you're going to be trackside. Partly cloudy forecast for all 3 days, and temperatures should be up around the mid to high 20s, of course dropping a little bit in the evening, but still quite mild. Should be great conditions for racing. Let's catch up on some of the biggest headlines from the off-season. I must admit, I've only picked a handful here because I haven't had my finger on the pulse of the sport quite as much as I usually do, because actually since the checkered flag fell in Adelaide, we've actually been going through the process of buying our own home and just moving into it a number of weeks ago. It took all my energy and attention, but obviously I still caught the big news items. The biggest of which is perhaps the biggest bombshell the sport has had in many years. Red Bull AAA are going to Ford in 2026, not only running Mustangs, but likely to become the homologation team, taking that leadership role away from Dick Johnson Racing. This was massive news that caught a lot of people by surprise. I was actually in the back of the truck unloading a bookshelf when I opened my phone and saw the news. I just about fell off the truck. It just happened to fall on the very day we were moving. I had no chance of recording a video, unfortunately, because it is huge news. It raises big questions about GM's future in the sport, although it sounds like they might already be canvassing different teams on who they might partner with. And of course, it raises questions for the likes of Dick Johnson Racing, who were no doubt planning to have Ford and their leadership role a big part of their rebuild process. So lots of questions, something I'd love to delve into with a dedicated video in the near future, and certainly it's a storyline to follow this year. In exciting news for myself as a Perth-based Supercars fan, the first artist's impression of the proposed street circuit near Optus Stadium has been released. It's a little hard to read into this one. It's very much a sort of election tool, I feel, rather than an official track reveal. However, it does look pretty promising, and we can read a little bit into what we see. It looks like they're very much relying on largely purpose-built sections of racetrack in Burswood Park, not really taking advantage of some of the perimeter existing roads as much as I thought they would. The result of that suggests a bit of a pokier street circuit than I was imagining, but as I said, a bit hard to tell how much we should read into those images. Time will tell what this event shapes up to be. On the topic of tracks, competition to host the second New Zealand round of the championship is hotting up. Of course, Highlands Motorsport Park seems like it's been in prime position for quite some time now, and Tony Quinn, the owner of that circuit, very much pushing to make it happen. However, Rapuna, one of the circuits on the South Island, I believe, has also put forward plans to really overhaul their facilities and bring that circuit into the 21st century, with the goal of potentially nabbing Supercars. No matter who ends up with that second event in New Zealand, I just want to see it happen because the fan base is there, and those events in New Zealand always have a great vibe. And then of course, ahead of the new season, we've had the new liveries for just about every team drop at the time of recording. Some pretty good liveries out there. It largely feels like lots of evolution rather than revolution for the runners. Some of the ones that caught my eye, I really like the refresh and the evolution that Shell V-Power Racing have done. I like the white base on the side of those cars. Red Bull, I feel like have taken a little step back. I'm missing that red that they had on the car last year. It's just looking a bit more bland than I would like. Newlon, on the other hand, the Premier team looks pretty striking. And I also like the way Courtney's car has evolved as well. It's a very distinct looking car, always stands out on the racetrack, and I'm certainly hoping he has a good final season as a full-time driver. So what's new in 2025? Well, the entire structure of how we crown our champion has been completely overhauled. Supercars has taken a leaf out of NASCAR's book with a more elimination style format, going for what they're calling the final series. Now, this is pretty complicated, I must admit. It is distinct from NASCAR's structure in many ways as well, and I'm going to delve into it in a bit more detail as we approach those key championship milestones, say towards the end of the Sprint Cup. For now, all I would say you need to know is at the end of Bathurst, your favorite driver needs to be in the top 10 of the driver standings in order to fight for the championship. And then they get progressively knocked out in the final few rounds of the season. Now, crucially, all cars are still on track. It's just the number of drivers eligible to win the championship will reduce with each round. And the ultimate goal and the ultimate outcome is that we will have 4 drivers in contention to take the crown at the Adelaide 500 finale. The finals concept seems to really be splitting opinion online. I'm going to share my thoughts on it in a few more minutes time. But beyond that, there's some really exciting changes, I feel, to the weekend formats themselves in Supercars this year. We're seeing a lot less practice, a lot more racing time, a lot more distance raced as well, and the sprint events, which I feel have really lacked in excitement and attention over recent years in Supercars, have had a big overhaul, starting, of course, with the action this weekend in Sydney. One of the key things that I'm really looking forward to is, of course, more racing at these events, but also the fact the Sunday races at the sprint rounds will have refueling. That's something we haven't seen in the likes of Perth for many, many years, and I think it's going to add a lot more dimension back to the racing. Gen 3 also feels like it's finally complete because Dunlop have brought a new soft compound that we'll see in action from this weekend in Sydney. Supercars, since the introduction of Gen 3, have actually still been carrying over the tyre from the previous generation of cars, and there's been lots of complaints about how that's impacted the racing. The drivers have been testing this new compound for pretty much a year now and have spoken very highly of it, but of course, the proof will be in the racing itself, which we'll get to judge in just a few days' time. And looking deeper into the season, we've got the return of a couple of tracks. The Bend will host its first endurance round in the lead up to Bathurst later in the year, and Queensland Raceway returns as well. This circuit has had a nice facelift since Tony Quinn purchased the venue, and it's been long called for that Supercars return to that location, and that will indeed be happening in 2025. But what about the action this weekend? Well, there is so much to look forward to, so many question marks. For a start, we have that racing from day one. Who is going to come out of the blocks firing because they don't have much time to find their feet? And that's even more interesting because we have so many new driver and engineer and team combinations right through the field, and some of that includes some new faces as well, starting their first full-time Supercars season in the main game seats. Of course, that includes Cooper Murray and Kai Allen, who were parachuted in at the last minute at the Adelaide 500 last year, had some pretty tough initiations, but now they've got a seat of their own to really bed in to the championship. It's going to be fascinating to see who can perform from the outset, and that brings us to my predictions. Now, at the start of the season, I really do want to stress that, as always, these are just a bit of fun. However, I do try to put some logic behind what I'm saying, and my first prediction is that Brody Kostecki will get a podium. Now, this is a bit of a bold one because that team have been down in the dumps for quite some time now, and Dick Johnson Racing themselves have been downplaying what the start of their season might look like as they rebuild from a tough few years. But I think Brody Kostecki and the engineering lineup he's brought with him will be a breath of fresh air for that team, and hopefully that instantly translates to some results. I think Richie Stanaway will be looking for a similar positive start after a bit of a false start with Grove Racing last year. He's now moved over to Premier Racing, and I'm predicting a strong weekend for him in that new long car. And I'm also predicting we're going to see 3 safety cars in the Supercars races this weekend. That brings us on to your predictions. First one here from Mayor Kiwi saying, this weekend we'll have 60 minutes of Larko, Tender and Scaife trying to make the playoff system make sense and trying to make it out like the fans asked for it, even though no fans I've talked to think it's a good idea. Yeah, as I said, the playoff system or finals, the Supercars are calling it, certainly has been divisive among the fan base. I might get chased to the hills over this, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm willing to give it a shot. I feel like if you really sit down and look at how it differs from the NASCAR system, which I feel like a lot of people have jumped at and assumed it's a copy and paste of that, there are some key differences, and I do feel like Supercars have evolved that championship structure in some pretty good ways. Now, that's not a judgment on NASCAR's system. I don't follow that sport close enough to really make a fair assessment of it. And as a result, I might be being a bit naive of what the season ahead looks like for us in Supercars. But for now, I'm willing to give it a shot. While I certainly will agree with you, though, there are some pretty big complexities in there. I remember when Larko was explaining how it all worked around Bathurst time last year, even he was getting muddled up. And if Larko's struggling to explain something, you know you got a bit of a problem on your hands. And I will agree as well, the announcement video where they said the fans have asked for this right out from the outset, it was just a bit tone deaf. I don't feel like the fans have asked for a final series necessarily. They've asked for more racing and more action, which I do feel like we've taken some positive steps towards. So I definitely understand the trepidation. For me, I'm a glass half full kind of guy and willing to give it a shot. And come the end of this year, we'll be able to make a pretty fair judgment, I feel. Nate Motorsport Photography has made a bolder prediction than me for Brody, saying he'll win at least one race this weekend in Sydney. And as for some season-long predictions, he's predicting 3 first-time winners, Randall, Wood, and Allen. Now, Randall and Wood, I think this would be a huge moment for them in their careers. Both of them have been, Randall especially, so close to getting that first win as a solo driver, and Wood had a great season in Supercars last year as a rookie, but unfortunately just didn't manage to bring home a trophy. Kai Allen, of course, is starting his first time in the championship full time. He'll be looking to make an impact, and if he can get a win in his first season, that would be a great accomplishment for him. And then the last comment here from Hudson saying it'll be interesting to see who gets dialed in quickly on Friday, but it's an unknown what it will be like. I'm back in Mostert to keep his pace from Sydney last year afloat, and a podium by one of the Premier guys. Reckon they'll go good this year. Yeah, some great comments there. Mostert, I think, will be looking for a strong start to the season. They were in the championship picture towards the end of last year, but some big mistakes really did cost them. Sydney was one of their better tracks though, so we'll see how they roll out. And Premier, they've been up and down like a roller coaster, but fingers crossed this season is the start of better days for them. Of course, as always, we have some great variety in the support categories. Super 2 will be back on track this weekend, always producing some great action with those young guns. Touring Car Masters will be on track if you like your racing a little bit more old school. Fingers crossed their fields continue to rebound in 2025. My guilty pleasure, the V8 Super Utes, they're going to be on track and guaranteed to cause chaos. I cannot wait. And the Porsche Carrera Cup Australia will also be on the track if you prefer yourself a little bit more downforce. And that will bring my first preview of 2025 to a close. Thank you for all your patience while I was missing in action during the off season and the chaos of purchasing and moving into our own home. I'm so glad it's all settled in time for the start of the racing action. I also appreciate all the feedback you give me in the channel survey over the past few months. I'll be looking to work on all that feedback throughout this season. I've already started with a brand new camera, and on my personal bucket list is some air conditioning in the studio because it is very hot in here. Fingers crossed the action on track is even hotter this weekend though. Enjoy the action whether you're watching on TV or at the track. Remember to treat people like a trackside down there in the comments, and I will see you in the round review in just a few days' time.